Nobody expected UFC Qatar to blow the lid off the entire lightweight division, but the moment Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker stepped into the cage, everything changed. The arena erupted, pros were losing their minds, and chaos spilled far beyond the fight itself. From frantic screams in the crowd to fighters backstage jaw-dropping at what they were watching. This wasn't just a matchup, it was a fault line splitting the division in half. And by the time the dust settled, one truth was impossible to ignore. This rivalry was only the beginning of something much bigger. Before a single punch landed, the atmosphere around Arman Tsarukyan versus Dan Hooker felt like something out of a disaster film. Fans weren't just cheering, they were shrieking. One viral clip caught someone yelling police at the top of their lungs, a moment so bizarre that fighters watching backstage couldn't tell if it was panic, excitement, or both. The cage-side crowd moved like a living wave, reacting to every feint, every breath, every hint that something violent was coming. Pros sitting just inches away were stunned before the fight even properly unfolded. You could hear them muttering, "Oh my God," and "not good. Not good." As Hooker tried to stay composed and Arman stalked forward with that cold, unblinking intensity. Even commentators couldn't keep the emotion out of their voices. Each second built a tension so heavy that it felt like the cage might implode from the pressure alone. It was chaos that didn't just set the tone, it cracked the tone wide open. Everyone watching could sense something dangerous, brewing, something that wasn't going to stay inside the cage. And as the crowd reached a fever pitch, pros began pulling out their phones, recording, reacting, and trying to make sense of the madness building right in front of them. But the real firestorm didn't begin until fighters themselves started weighing in. Long before the cage-side chaos reached a breaking point, every seasoned fighter watching had already circled Arman Tsarukyan as the storm headed straight for Dan Hooker. You could hear it in their voices. Nobody spoke about Arman casually. They called him a beast, a future champion, even one of the best fighters in the world. And these weren't just analysts hyping the moment. These were current and former pros who've lived inside the fire and know exactly what true danger looks like. Part of it was Arman's unmistakable style. His pressure has that familiar Dagestani flavor, cold, suffocating, and relentless, forcing opponents to make mistakes they never planned on making. More than one fighter compared him to the Islam Makhachev mold, disciplined, merciless, and built for dominance in every phase. Even Islam himself once hinted that Arman might surpass him down the line, a statement that fighters never forget. And yet Arman's foundation isn't Dagestani at all. His Armenian wrestling lineage gives him a different kind of grit, more explosive transitions, unexpected scrambles, and a willingness to dive headfirst into positions most lightweights wouldn't dare touch. It's the blend of those two worlds that makes fighters whisper about him, the way they whispered about young Khabib, with equal parts fear and respect. So as the pros watched Hooker move around the cage, they weren't wondering if Arman would take the fight over. They were wondering how bad it would get. But one man wasn't impressed, and he made it personal. While the pros were busy praising Arman Tsarukyan like he was the next heir to the lightweight throne, Dan Hooker was preparing for something entirely different. To him, this fight wasn't about rankings, hype, or even skill. It was a battle of identity. Hooker saw Arman as the complete opposite of everything he stood for, and he didn't sugarcoat a single word. In interview after interview, Hooker painted Arman as a silver spoon bully who had everything handed to him. He described him as a guy who flew around the world with elite coaches, trained in the best facilities, and acted like the fight game owed him something. At one point, Hooker's frustration boiled over, and he flat out called Arman a rich prick, a spoiled, mouthy kid, and someone who carried childish energy everywhere he went. But Hooker didn't stop at insults. He framed the whole rivalry as a class war. He called himself the fighter for the working man, someone who clawed his way up through grit, broken bones, and brutal setbacks. Arman, he claimed, was just playing the part of a bully, trying to throw his weight around to see who would fold. And Hooker wanted to make one thing crystal clear: he wasn't folding. "I'm not a person you can push around," he said. "I don't back down. Not now. Not ever." It was raw, it was emotional, and it set the stage for a collision fueled by pride as much as skill. But the pros didn't exactly agree. As Hooker doubled down on painting Arman as a spoiled bully, the rest of the MMA world was quietly forming a very different picture. Fighter after fighter, analyst after analyst, all came to the same conclusion: Arman Tsarukyan was simply too much. MMA guru known for nitpicking every flaw in a fighter's game still couldn't bring himself to side with Hooker. He admitted Hooker was underrated, praised his scrambling and improved takedown defense, but ultimately said Arman's top control and finishing ability were on another level. Once the fight hit the ground, he believed it would be Arman's world. Then came Kamaru Usman, one of the smartest minds in MMA, predicting a 2-round submission. Usman laid it out plainly. Arman had looked sharper than ever since his loss to Islam, and his ability to rip the playbook from elite grapplers made him a nightmare matchup. Mateusz Gamrot, a man who shared the cage with both fighters, gave it a 60-40 edge for Arman, praising his all-around game and calling him the more complete athlete. Beneil Dariush echoed the sentiment, saying it was tough to pick against Arman unless Hooker turned the fight into a pure punching match. Even former champ Jamahal Hill was blunt. He warned that unless Hooker hurt Arman early, fans should expect a boring grind of relentless grappling and pressure because Arman didn't care about excitement, he cared about winning. Coaches weighed in too, highlighting Arman's conditioning, his chaining of wrestling into striking, and his suffocating mat control. It was nearly unanimous, but the fight wasn't just about skills. Behind all the predictions and trash talk, there was a silent truth that nobody in the UFC wanted to admit. This fight was carrying the weight of the entire lightweight division on its back. For Arman Tsarukyan, the pressure was suffocating. He wasn't just fighting Dan Hooker, he was fighting to protect his #1 spot, the position he'd clawed his way into through years of grinding. A single slip, a single bad night, and he wouldn't just fall down the rankings, he'd plummet. Arman called it a 3 steps back kind of loss, the kind that sets a contender back an entire year. Meanwhile, Hooker wasn't fighting for stability, he was fighting for a shortcut. One win over Arman would let him skip the entire line, leapfrog bigger names, and land himself right in front of the champion. It was the chance every veteran dreams of: bypass the slow climb and jump straight into a title conversation before time runs out. Then you had the shadow of Ilia Topuria hanging over everything. The champion didn't want to engage with Arman all week. He dodged questions, avoided confrontations, and kept his distance, like someone refusing to give a future rival any oxygen. Even Arman noticed it, admitting he'd start creating crazy viral videos just to force Ilia's attention. In a division fueled by media hype and the noise, going quiet was a strategy, and Ilia was using it. Because everyone knew the truth, whoever won this fight wasn't just climbing the ranks. They were stepping directly into the champion's spotlight. And then came the prediction that changed the whole division. While the world focused on Arman and Hooker trading shots and interviews, a completely different game was unfolding behind the scenes, one centered around the man wearing the belt, Ilia Topuria. And strangely enough, Kamaru Usman may have delivered the most honest take of all. Usman believed an impressive Arman win would actually benefit Ilia, because in a division full of stalled momentum and injured contenders, a dominant performance from the Barca guy forces the champion to stay active. No more waiting, no more dodging, no more let's see what happens. Arman winning meant Ilia would have no choice but to defend his belt against a hungry, surging contender. But the UFC had its own plan brewing, and it involved the biggest shift in years, the Paramount Plus era launching in 2026. Rumors were already swirling about the first major event of the new broadcast deal at T-Mobile Arena, and the matchup the UFC quietly loved: Topuria versus Paddy. The animosity was real, the fan interest explosive, and Paddy hadn't fought since April. He was fresh, loud, marketable, and in a sport driven by eyeballs that matters. Still, with Arman's win streak heating up and the division waking back up after Islam's departure from lightweight chaos, was returning in the best possible way. For the first time in months, the UFC had options: Ilia versus Paddy for fireworks, or Ilia versus Arman for legitimacy. Either way, the champion's hand was being forced. The division was moving again, and Arman was right in the center of the storm. And that's when Hooker doubled down with his harshest insult yet. Just when it seemed like the tension between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker couldn't stretch any tighter, Hooker snapped it clean in half with one last barrage of raw, unfiltered emotion. If his earlier comments were sharp, these were knives. Hooker didn't hold back. He accused Arman of being nothing more than a bully in the fight game. Not just aggressive, not just confident, but a full-on bully who strutted around like he owned the place and tried to push people around to see who would crumble. And Hooker made sure everyone understood he wasn't one of those people. He doubled down on the idea that Arman carried a rich kid attitude, the kind of energy that comes from thinking status replaces respect. To Hooker, Arman wasn't just an opponent, he was everything Hooker had spent his entire career fighting against: entitlement, arrogance, unchecked ego. Their personalities couldn't have clashed harder. Arman's cold confidence collided directly with Hooker's gritty stubbornness, and fans could feel the electricity between them every time they traded words. Social media caught fire. Clips of Hooker calling Arman a spoiled punk went viral. Arman's icy responses only added fuel. This wasn't a polite rivalry. It was pride, frustration, resentment, and ambition boiling together until the entire lightweight division was watching. By the time fight week arrived, this wasn't just about skill or rankings anymore. It was personal. It was emotional. It was a collision that had to happen. But underneath all the trash talk, something much bigger was happening. While the outside world obsessed over trash talk and viral soundbites, Arman Tsarukyan was quietly focused on something far bigger than a single fight. Behind the intensity, behind the pressure, there was a long-term blueprint he rarely spoke about, one built around legacy, not hype. Arman revealed he planned to stay at lightweight for the next 2 to 3 years, refusing to jump divisions until he shattered as many records at 155 as possible. Title defenses, win streaks, dominance. He wanted all of it. Not because the media asked for it, but because he believed greatness required time discipline and a willingness to outwork everyone around him. He made it clear he wasn't chasing viral moments or trending headlines. He was chasing history. And that meant waiting patiently for the title shot he felt he'd already earned. Whether it happened in Vegas, Los Angeles, or halfway across the world didn't matter. When the UFC finally called, he'd be ready. That was his obsession. In many ways, Hooker represented the old guard fighters who survived through toughness, grit, and sheer stubborn will. Arman was the new era, cold preparation, technical precision, and a long-term plan built on strategy instead of chaos. Their collision wasn't just a fight, it was a generational shift playing out in real time. So as the dust settled and the division looked toward the future, one thing became impossible to ignore. Arman wasn't just winning fights. He was moving with the purpose of a man preparing to take over everything, and the next chapter of this war might shake the entire UFC. When Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker collided, it wasn't just a fight, it was a flashpoint that exposed everything simmering beneath the lightweight division. Pride, ego, legacy, and skill all crashed together, revealing the stakes every fighter tries to hide. The old guard's grit met the new era's precision. Champions felt the pressure. Contenders sensed opportunity. And the entire division shifted in one explosive night. But this story is far from over. Is this the rise of the next lightweight king? Or just the opening act of a far bigger war?